Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I am Adrian Fort, and we are here for the second video in the Haunted Suite. This is a discussion on pages 101 through 200 of the book Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. And let's get right into things. One problem that this section of the book made me realize that I have with Chuck Palahniuk's work is that you can feel him find the piece. This book is called Haunted, and there is no mention of ghostly stuff at all, at least that I remember. And I'm a fairly dedicated reader. I'm a fairly observant reader. I like to think anyway. There's no real mention of the ghostly stuff at all that I remember of any import until the last line of a short story in this section by Whittier. And until it, which is, and I quote, "And until one of those stains comes back to haunt him, he told us, we would not be his last." This happens on page 117, which is the last page of the short story. Then on page 118, there's a quote that says, "Pitch dark except for the ghost light," which, tradition says, keeps any ghosts from moving in. Look, I'm sorry, Chuck. I'm glad you found your theme. But you don't get to just adopt it here. We're 100 pages in to a 400-page plus novel. We're 25% of the way into this book. You don't get to adopt a theme here. What you have to do in the editing process is go back and plant little seeds along the way. And maybe this happened and I just didn't catch it. But what you do is, once you find your theme on page 117 or wherever it is, you continue writing the book with that theme. Once you find it, you keep it. But in the editing process, you go in and on page 12, somewhere along the line, you plant this little seed, this vague idea of a ghost, of a haunting, of something ghostly, something ghastly. And you mention it again and again and again, and every time you mention it, you refine it a little bit more towards what it is that you are trying to communicate. That's how a theme works. That is what you do with a theme once you find it. But you don't get to just accept this on page 116 and move forward with it. And this is something that, by memory, Invisible Monsters and Choke suffered from very poorly as well. And to a lesser extent, so did Fight Club. When you're reading Fight Club, once the idea of Project Mayhem is presented, it becomes a large literary theme in the novel. It becomes a very important and integral piece of what is being communicated in the story. But before that, you don't really have it. And there are several other little things, at least in that novel, that I'm failing to remember off the top of my head. But what you do, and the thing that is so frustrating about this is that is especially, I keep mentioning minimalism on the channel, that is an especially useful tool for the minimalist writer, because the theme is, because every time you mention it, not only are you getting it closer to what it is you were hoping to communicate, but you're getting all of this added meaning on top of it. And Palahniuk has set up what could be a stunning example of minimalism. All of these characters exist for, look, this is a 404 page book. After about page 30, the entire novel happens in the same building, at least to my memory. Now there are obviously short stories which go along the way, but what you stand to do with those short stories is further comment on these themes that you're building, because everything comes back to the same place. After we get that short story, we're back in this theater that everyone is trapped in. But it feels, there was a commenter, someone commented on the first video that Palahniuk wanted to publish this as a collection of short stories, and his publisher told him, no, we're publishing novels. So he said, okay, and he wrote a novel framework around it. you still have the responsibility to your reader to make it coherent. You still have the responsibility to your reader to make it concise. You still have the responsibility to your reader to communicate a full story. And as I read through this for the second time, I am realizing more and more that the ambition of the project does not save it. It is, in fact, so congested that on page 119, we're still getting description, vital description, description without which we would not be able to fully visualize the setting. We're still getting description of the setting on page 119, when outside of the first 30 pages or so, the whole damn thing has happened in the same building. Why haven't we gotten this before? Well, because we've had 12 short stories, we've had 12 poems, we've introduced 19 characters. So these are things that are frustrating. On page 123, we get this quote, which is fairly telling for me, as it is a stark, contrasting example. Still, a good story means, let me start over. Still, a good story means no heat. Slow starvation means no breakfast. Dirty clothes. Maybe we're not as brainy smart as Lord Byron and Mary Shelley, but we can tolerate some shit to make our story work. And what this is another example of the presumption that one must write about one's own struggle, not through the lens of one's own struggle, but explicitly about it. And this is contrasted in this example, in this little quote, beautifully against a classic work that was seemingly influenced by Mary Shelley's own struggles, a woman's struggle for identity and personhood during the time in which she was living. Versus, and she was writing through the lens of science fiction creating a monster, right? So that's writing through the lens of your experience versus writing about your experience as you struggle to be a writer, as you struggle with as one struggles with their own poverty or with their own shortcoming. And I think, and then after this, we keep getting heavier and heavier into these characters talking about the movie that will be made from their experience. Which it pains me to have to go back to, but golly, Fight Club was written largely about, from what I understand, things that Palahniuk struggled with himself, about things that Palahniuk struggled with, not through the lens of things with which Palahniuk struggled. So it was published, and it was, in the afterword to the novel, he says that he was promised by the publisher what was called kiss-off money. Money that said, it's an okay story, we don't really want to have anything to do with it, we'll give you pittance for the right to publish it. And Palahniuk accepted. He had no idea that it was kiss-off money. He just wanted his book out there. He wanted his book to be a live project. A living thing, its own entity. So he accepted it. And the book was fairly well received. It did well. But Palahniuk was launched into superstardom by Fight Club the movie. And it was after Fight Club the movie that Palahniuk was able to just write his own checks and publish anything he wanted. So, psychoanalysis is dangerous, but it is a valid form of literary criticism despite what some will tell you. And it's hard not to look at this text and go back and say, this is Palahniuk describing his own struggle, and you have to wonder if he's even conscious of it on this level, because they keep going back to what it is that they're going to write about, which they must have struggled through, and then the subsequent movie, which will be made about the process. And I hate to comment on it again, but the poetry here really is like what someone would write if they didn't know the double subject proposition of poetry. sort of like a subject-object dichotomy which exists within a poem. The poem, those things which happen in the poem must not be what the poem is about. A rose, for example. The rose is the object, but it is not the subject. A rose may be the object, and we're going to cliches here, but I think it's something that's easy to communicate. A rose may be the subject of a poem, or the object of a poem. That is what you're writing of. What you're writing about is your lover. That is the subject. The subject is your lover, the object is the rose. Anyway, there is a quote which I liked on page 134. I'll try to throw a quote in here. Miss Clark says, "Sometimes it seems that we spend the first half of our lives looking for some disaster," and she looks down at her straight-out chest, a look made almost impossible by her enhanced lips. "As young people," she says, "we want something to slow us down and keep us trapped in one place long enough to look below the surface of the world. That disaster is a car crash or a war, to make us sit still. It can be getting cancer or getting pregnant. The important part is how it seems to catch us by surprise. The disaster stops us from living the life we'd planned as children, a life of constant dashing around." I think that is I like that quote. I think that is a good quote to take from this section. And to end on a positive note, there is a short story in this section which, again, suffers from the theme or the subject being thrown into something too late and making it confusing. Punch Drunk is a short story in this section, which is a really fun short story. But like I say, it suffers from a lot of the affliction that a lot of Palahniuk's work suffers from. And another way that I think this can be explained, and this short story is a good example of it being able to be explained through this process, is it suffers from the nudist Buddhist conundrum. An out of left field turn, right? Basically, the nudist Buddhist is, if you sat down with your friends, you as you, and said, "Hey guys, just want to let you know I'm a nudist now. I'm going to live in a nudist colony." Everyone that knows me would say, if I did it, everyone that knows me would say, he's always been sort of weird. This is just something he's going to do. Okay, that's fine. He's still Adrian. We still accept him for being Adrian. If you sat down with your friends and you said, "Hey guys, I've been thinking about the religions of the world and all these things. I've been examining all of this stuff, and I really think I'm a Buddhist." Again, all of my friends would say, "He's always been kind of weird. This is the Midwest. There's not a lot of Buddhists around. I don't know where he learned about the stuff. But okay, he's still Adrian. We still accept him for who he is." But if you sat down with your friends and you said, "Hey, guys, I just want to let you know, I've decided to make some life changes. I'm going to be a nudist Buddhist," they wouldn't know what the hell you were talking about, right? The Punch Drunk short story is about these guys who go bar to bar and they make money by dressing in drag and singing, or putting all their quarters into the jukebox and playing Celine Dion music all night long. So they charge people $5 to punch them in the face, right? So they start making all this money, which is an interesting short story, and you wonder where he's going for it. That's the nudist part, for example. The end of the short story is that they are, as it turns out, basically suicide bombers in the name of sort of free thought and atheism, kind of. That's the Buddhist part thrown in, right? It's the nudist Buddhist. You don't get to write a short story which is both of these things and expect it to be all right. But again, it is a fun short story. That is something that Palahniuk seems to be good at, is writing things which are fun, is writing things which, yeah, okay, I'll read it. I'll keep going. Even with all of its flaws, at no point during the reading of this book have I decided, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, it's not worth my time. And just like all Palahniuk works, there are little phrases from time to time which really shine. So I think that's where I'm going to end it for this episode. If you like this sort of thing, hit like and subscribe. And I hope to see you as we travel through Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk, and this is Haunted with the worst possible cover.